You're recognized, sir.
After I ask questions, I'm going to need to go to the Asia Subcommittee, which I'm also a member of, and my colleague from Illinois will take over as ranking member for a while. Mr. Friedman, you allude to legislation carried by Senator Rubio. My favorite piece of legislation of Senator Rubio, and I wish he was related to Secretary Rubio, was the No Nuclear Weapons for Saudi Arabia Act, which he and I introduced in 2018, which required the gold standards of control to have, including, of course, the additional protocol, in order for us to have a nuclear cooperation agreement with Saudi Arabia. So I'm hoping that Senator Rubio will come back to us and support that effort. Mr. Friedman, you point out that the Abrahamic Accords represent a victory of the moderates over the extremists. But those victories were completed in 2020. We haven't seen any further. And I think the reason for that is we've seen the moderates lose to the extremists in Israel, which now has a government with Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, the apostles of settler violence. I think it's highly unlikely that we're going to see any progress with Israel's Arab neighbors so long as we see the continuation of settler violence and until we see progress toward a two-state solution. And I would point out that statehood does not require that you have weapons. Costa Rica does not have an army. It is a state. I think that the country, Mr. Friedman, you say that the countries that might enter in the Abrahamic Accords don't regard the war as a disaster. Right now, no country is interested in joining the Abrahamic Accords because of the extremists in the Israeli government. But we've heard from the Gulf Cooperation Council again and again that they regard this war as a disaster. What they're saying even more privately, I don't know. So, Ambassador Shapiro, we've heard that talk of a Palestinian state in the halls of Congress is widely out of touch with realities on the ground, but is an Israel that renounces a Palestinian state as even a possibility, wildly out of touch with political realities in the Arab world. If Crown Prince bin Salman were to normalize relations and enter into the positive relationship that the Abraham Accords call for, without any movement toward a two-state solution, without even any punishment of those guilty of settler violence, would that pose a threat to him continuing to serve as the leader of Saudi Arabia?
Thank you, Mr. Sherman. I don't think it's really a possibility he's going to do it, so I don't think it poses a threat in that sense. It is true, of course, as you stated, that the idea of a Palestinian state being created is not immediately on the agenda, not something most Israelis feel ready to take a risk on. Any change toward that goal, which I repeat is part of point 19 of President Trump's 20-point plan, the credible pathway to that Palestinian state, requires reform of the Palestinian Authority, obviously requires removal of Hamas from power in Gaza, but it is necessary to be on the table and there to be directionality toward that if we do hope to see further expansion of these accords. And particularly the Saudis have been very clear. I'll just mention that the person who probably spent more time than anybody devoted to this effort to Saudi-Israeli normalization was the late Senator Lindsey Graham, who we're all remembering and honoring this time. And he said very, very clearly there was no way, based on his private conversations with the Crown Prince, and I can attest to those as well, that this would be a possibility for him to take forward without that credible pathway to a Palestinian state also being part of it.
And the UAE agreed to the Abraham Accords and received a promise that the West Bank would not be annexed. What happens to the UAE's participation in the Abrahamic Accords if there's there's continued discussion at the highest levels in the Israeli government of violating that agreement.
Congressman,
And-
that wasn't the deal.
Well, it's the deal that
I negotiated the deal. That wasn't the deal.
it's the deal that I've heard from them, if not from you.
I'm happy to share with you
So
what the deal was.
in any case, would any other country be interested in the Abraham Accords if they see Israel at least appear to renounce annexation and then continue to move in that
Sure.
direction?
What was announced at the time of the Abraham Accords was a moratorium on progress toward annexation, something like 4 years. There were different reports on it. Ambassador Friedman obviously was deeply involved in it. But it was definitely an element in the UAE's decision to go forward with those accords that was laid out publicly by the UAE ambassador to Washington in an op-ed in an Israeli newspaper. It wouldn't be a violation of that agreement if it had a time limit on it. However, the UAE has spoken out very forcefully against moves towards annexation, against settler violence. And again, I think in the atmosphere created by the extremists within the Israeli government, you mentioned, and some of those activities that seem to close all doors to a future Palestinian state and seem to raise tensions in the West Bank and expand settlements and permit settler violence, I don't think it's an atmosphere in which other countries will come forward.
Thank you.
There's no question this is a difficult time to be thinking about expanding it. What I would suggest, though, is that, and I know, Congress, you've got 75 other things on your plate. Maybe I'm understating it, so I don't mean to suggest that there's more work to do on this. But in hearing, for example, Congressman Schneider talking about, Sherman, speaking about settler violence as if it's this thing that exists out there which is dragging everybody down. We're being flooded by a tidal wave of anti-Israel media. Maybe it comes from China, maybe it comes from Qatar, maybe it's homegrown. But there's a lot of news out there which isn't right. And just on that one point, we talk about a dog bites man story and a man bites dog story. Nobody reports about a dog biting a man because it's not interesting. It happens all the time. When a man bites a dog, that's a story, right? And settler violence is man bites dog because it doesn't happen that often, but it's so prone with emotion and anger that it gets the headlines. I'm there all the time. I mean, I live this issue. We have to stop settler violence, of course we do. But let's try to stop the violence that causes the settler violence, which is on a magnitude of 10 times. So I think, it's important just to get our arms around the facts and not be driven by the tidal wave of anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, incorrect media, which is just making it very, very hard to make good decisions.
I'm going to reclaim my time because we're getting a little far afield of the question I asked, and the chairman's going to indulge me for another question, but I appreciate your feedback. Ambassador Shapiro, another concern that I have is that the current scope of the Abraham Accords is far too focused on the grass tops, on the elites, senior officials, major businesses, tech investors, weapons sales, and not nearly enough on the grassroots, the rank and file people on the ground. And when I have talked with each of the Abraham Accord country leaders and asked them, and even, for example, we would obviously all have preferred more robust statements following October 7th from Abraham Accord-led countries. And when I asked many of those leaders why, even though they obviously did condemn the attacks by Hamas, they said that there is not the buy-in, the same kind of buy-in on the ground in those Abraham Accord countries as there is among the elites. Ordinary people in the region, these accords have not permeated. So the Trump administration, just for example, has drained the bipartisan Nita Lowey Middle East Partnership for Peace Act, or the MEPA Act. That made those kinds of investments in Israeli and Palestinian civil society possible, including collaborative projects that brought Israelis and Palestinians together. And there's so much more that we need to do to push down that interaction and engagement so that there's buy-in that frees up those leaders to integrate their societies even more. And the Trump administration also made substantial cuts to efforts to modernize education in the Middle East and North Africa, not only to remove anti-Semitism from curricula, but to add in Holocaust education. So, Ambassador Shapiro, is it possible for the Abraham Accords to live up to their intended goals without those investments in building mutual understanding and normalization at the grassroots level? And what can we do to advance that goal?